Welcome back to the Ascended Workplace. I'm Adam.
And I'm Rebecca. We are the co-founders of Ascended Consulting, where we turn generational challenges into leadership wins. Today, we're taking a closer look at generational differences. As we help today's leaders learn how to engage, retain, and empower Gen Z, we find that it is important to acknowledge the fact that in some ways, this is just the latest version of older workers saying, this generation just doesn't get it.
From baby boomers to Gen X to millennials to Gen Z, every generation gets labeled lazy, entitled, too soft, too tough, you name it, they get labeled it.
So in this episode, we're going to look at the actual differences between generations at work, what's just a recycled complaint that happens with every generation, and then how leaders can move beyond the stereotypes to address the true concerns and build stronger multi-generational teams.
So if we take it back, we get some context on this. Complaining about the next generation is not a new trend. If you go back to the 4th century, Plato writes that the youth is disrespecting their elders and they love luxury. Does that sound familiar?
Oh my gosh, yes, because it's literally the same thing people say about Gen Z today. So some of the so-called differences are actually just universal human patterns. Older generations establish norms and younger ones push back.
But the nuances, while the human dynamics repeat, the context of it all changes. Technology, the economy, education, all of that shapes how generations show up at work.
Yeah, for example, baby boomers entered the world of long-term job security, but Gen X dealt with downsizing and instability. Millennials graduated into the Great Recession, and Gen Z grew up with smartphones, social media, and unfortunately, well-meaning but limiting educational policies that all of that shaped their identities.
Yeah. So what does this look like in the workplace specifically? So we're going to run through it by generation, and depending on what source you use, they might change the years a little bit, but for baby boomers, we're talking mostly born between 1946 to 1964. They're known for their loyalty, valuing hierarchy, which always comes up as something that is valued by baby boomers consistently, and defining themselves by their career. Then we talk about Gen X, born between 1965 to 1980. They're independent, they're skeptical of institutions, and they value the work-life balance. Then we come to millennials, is where I fall, millennial, for the ages born between 1981 to 1996. They're known as collaborative, feedback-driven, and mission-oriented. And of course, Gen Z, from 1997 to 2012. They're known as digital natives, which we take some issue with that stereotype right off the jump. We'll talk about that. But entrepreneurial, expect flexibility, and inclusivity are the other things that people say about Gen Z.
Yeah, and while those categories do have some truth, they also risk becoming stereotypes because not every Gen Z wants to work from Bali and not every baby boomer lives at the office. And even like this idea of millennials, they're super into texting and communicating through chats and things like that. So I actually am more, and I'm what you call a zennial, in between that Gen X and the millennial. But I'm more prone to wanting to text now, whereas Adam, when I'm supposed to reach out to you, what do you prefer?
I would much rather a phone call. I actually don't really like texting. I think it's a horrendous way to communicate in certain contexts because no emotion comes through. It's not for me. It's not my favorite. Call me.
So we can see how some of the stereotypes don't always play out. Now, stereotypes exist often based on some larger patterns that are seen, but they can't be applied to every individual.
Right. Every generation is shaped by the world that they grew up in. That's why the stereotypes don't apply to everyone in every capacity. It's why people say Gen Z craves flexibility. It's not that they're entitled to it. It's because they grew up in instability and they're trying to chase some amount of control.
So the friction shows up in the workplace across a few areas. So one of those is communication styles, which we just talked about a little bit already, right? The baby boomers, they may prefer phone calls, but Gen Z lives in text, Slack, and DMs. So when that happens, miscommunication is inevitable because you just mentioned how those forms that Gen Z prefers, they do often lack the ability to communicate emotion, and things can get misinterpreted, especially when Gen Z is the one sending the message to the higher ups. Sometimes they don't understand the intent, and then it goes the opposite direction as well, where maybe the baby boomers don't realize how much emotion they need to try to make up for when they're using that form of communication.
Yeah, I mean, I've even heard for previous place I worked that the messaging of "give it to me by the COB," the close of business, which is just the typical way to say it, was too intense for some people at the place. Right. And the leader actually changed it to the end of the workday instead of just putting by COB, which is like, but that's what it was. Yeah, it was kind of crazy.
Yeah, it's just how we interpret things, the lens that we come to them through. So work ethic and perceptions is another area where we're going to see some friction. So older workers often think the younger ones just don't want to work. But I would say that Gen Z isn't anti-work. They're anti-wasting time and what they perceive as meaningless work. And sometimes that's that communication breakdown because they don't always have the larger picture as the people who are higher up in the organization. And in the past, younger and newer workers have been okay with not having the bigger picture. They just knew what they needed to do in their role and they did it. Whereas now for Gen Z, they want to feel like they are part of the process and understand how what they're doing is meaningful. And if that's not brought to them, then they're like, what's the point of doing this?
Why am I doing this? Right. Yep. The why.
And then that kind of leads into that authority and feedback friction that also exists. So baby boomers grew up respecting hierarchy, whereas Gen Z expects a say and constant feedback because that's what they have gotten within the school system,
yes,
right?
At all
Everything
times.
has been, I actually worked at a school where their big slogan was choice and comfort. So everything you were supposed to do as an educator.
How did you feel about that, Rebecca? That their motto was choice and comfort.
Was, everything you were supposed to do was to make their lives comfortable and to give them choice in that process, which we know that growth doesn't take place when you're just too comfortable, but that's okay. That's what it was, and that's what they've grown up with, a lot of them. And so it's not their fault when they go into the workplace and they're expecting that same type of environment. So we have to retrain. And it does feel disruptive to managers who are used to this idea that no news is good news. So they don't feel the need to constantly give the feedback that this younger generation actually craves and they need it. And they do need it.
Yeah, they need it and just truly like they're expecting it.
Yes.
And if they're not getting it, something is off with what they're doing or it's how they're going to perceive it.
Yeah. And then if, the only feedback you give is negative, then we're like doubling down. So we've talked a lot about feedback in other episodes, and we'll talk about it more in future episodes for sure. And then the last area of friction, of course, is technology. So Gen Z may roll their eyes when a colleague struggles to navigate an element of programs like Slack or Teams or Asana, but your baby boomers are going to roll their eyes when a Gen Zer suggests yet another app. Right. So we see some friction in the workplace on how technology is used.
Yep. And these conflicts aren't just annoying. They also hurt productivity, the morale of the company and the organization, and retention if leaders can't address them.
Wonderful. So what we're going to look at is what's real versus what's recycled. So we're going to separate myth from reality. So like one myth we've talked about in the past is that Gen Z is lazy, but the reality is that they don't struggle with work ethic. They're not unwilling to work. It's because they weren't taught how to build that work ethic.
Right. Yep. Gen Z was taught from a school system that eliminated the deadlines, which we've talked about, loosened attendance, and rewarded effort over mastery. So just trying was enough. It wasn't about the actual product. These policies were to try and reduce stress, create equity, and in some cases it did do that, but it left students without knowing how to show up consistently, push through challenging situations and difficulty, and especially owning responsibility for the results. If something isn't coming out the way it's supposed to, there's a chance to retry it again a different way, or even do something completely different to earn the same points, or not even have the points matter in any capacity. It was to give them choice and comfort. Actually, just to throw it back. Honestly, it about choice and comfort over the results. So when they enter the workplace, they're not used to it. Accountability isn't second nature to them. They haven't grown up with it. It is a brand new process for a lot of them.
Yeah, so they've had tons of feedback, but none of that feedback was holding them accountable. The feedback they got through the schools was always very soft and very positive, and like we said, choice and comfort.
Right, yeah.
always with the focus of just how to make them have a great self-esteem rather than having them to overcome any kind of obstacle or challenge. So that's why leaders need to see it for what it is. It's a training gap. It's not a character flaw. So if you assume that you're lazy, you'll lower your expectations or you'll disengage. But if you see the gap as teachable, you can actually rebuild the skills that the system didn't provide.
Right. And here's the opportunity. This is what matters, and this is what I want to hammer home. Gen Z is adaptable, they are resourceful, and they are eager for feedback. And with strong expectations and coaching, they can grow into some of the most resilient employees that you could ever have. But leaders must be willing, like you said, to teach them how the systems, or to teach them about things that the system has failed to teach them, to go back to what you said.
Awesome.
So if we look at a real life example of how this plays out in a workplace, you have a Gen Z analyst who wants flexible hours and remote work, right? That's a pretty typical thing that's going on right now.
Absolutely.
So senior partners, mostly baby boomers, want everyone in the office 8 to 6. They're talking about, we gotta get people back in the office, it's important.
Yeah, and that's where tension can arise if the discussion gets framed as laziness versus dedication. But when you dig deeper, you can understand that both sides actually want the same thing, the ability to produce quality work. They just have different visions of how to get there.
Right, so you're not picking a side here that's not gonna win the argument. You wanna create a hybrid model which has clear performance expectations, flexibility for the younger staff on how they can reach those clear performance expectations. The key word is they're clear though, and we've gone over in a previous episode how to create clear expectations. So you can refer back to that one. And intentional in-office days for collaboration to still allow that office lifestyle of the, not 8 to 6 necessarily, if that's what you're going for, but allow the opportunity to come together, collaborate in person, not over text message, thank goodness, because I can't stand it. So collaborate in person. I'm more of the baby boomer in this situation. It's crazy. But the result is higher morale and better output when you can combine strengths. That's what we're really trying to do, combine strengths.
It made me really happy when you called yourself the
I know,
baby
'cause I
boomer
know.
because just a little peek behind the curtain, guys. Adam keeps calling me a boomer, which isn't even the right generation for me, but I love it because I think I do tend to lean in towards some of the baby boomer expectations, but hybrid more so,
Yeah.
to bring it back some of the elements that would help Gen Z. But yeah, that's the magic that you were just talking about, finding the common goal and letting the how be shaped by the generational strengths. And I guess that's kind of what I was saying about, I really think there's so many valuable things from the baby boomers and then from Gen X and then the millennials. And now we're trying to help companies and organizations see that Gen Z is bringing a lot of value to the table as well.
Tons of value. So we talked about the differences, but what can leaders do to manage those generational differences effectively? So I'm going to give 4 strategies that really matter here. The first one, we're calling name it, don't shame it. Normalize the reality that Gen Z has not had the same training in deadlines, persistence, and accountability, and call it out without making a moral judgment. Understand that it's coming from what they've been taught, not necessarily what they want to show or how they want to show up in the workplace. It's the system that has taught them these things, to forget about deadlines, persistence, and accountability.
That's great.
Second one, reteach work ethic as a skill. Do not assume that all of your employees already have it. It must be taught. We need to set clear expectations, model those expectations with consistent habits, and you must, as you said, explain the why behind the standards. It cannot just be because I said so. It must be ingrained into the fabric of the organization. Accountability is a muscle, and leaders can help Gen Z build it, but they have to be willing to explain why. Third one, create cross-generational mentoring. Put your younger employees with seasoned employees who can pass down discipline and persistence, but the younger staff can share fresh perspectives and the technology skills that your company needs to succeed. combine the skills, don't separate them, create cross-generational opportunities. It's going to be so important, and it allows the Gen Z employees to be a part of the process instead of just feeling like their say isn't there.
Yeah, and just a quick note on those tech skills. What people don't realize is you mentioned kind of briefly earlier that we have this idea that they are digital natives. But what students don't know how to do is how to use, so actually the baby boomers and the Gen Xers and the millennials are going to have to teach Gen Z how to utilize things like folders. Because they're so used to the streaming. They're digital natives to their phones. They aren't digital natives to the workplace use of the computer.
Digital natives to the entertainment, to the algorithms, to the I know how to operate social media, like those kinds of things. But like you said, like the folders, the organization, the potential programs, word process, like any of them, is just how to save files. I mean, these are things I've literally had to teach students. And you expect, you're like, these are the digital natives, but no, it's truly like, this is how you organize your folders and your files. Like that term is, the digital native term we got to come up with a different way to describe it, because it's not, they're really not in that sense.
But all the new apps that come out are geared to the way that they have experienced technology. So they really are, it is a lot easier for them to adapt to the new apps and the new platforms and the new programs, but they still need training. And that's where that cross-generational mentoring really will come into be handy, even across technology.
And so the last one, and it kind of goes back to what we said before, but focusing on outcomes, not just the methods to get there. Hold the line on the results and your expectations, but give space for learning how to get there. Let the creativity flow, but have the clear expectation of where you want to go. That mix of accountability plus support will build confidence and resilience in your employees.
We're always talking about high expectations partnered with high support. And then your support can drop off as they've developed
Reach the expectations.
So when leaders take this approach, they're not lowering their standards. They're raising Gen Z up to meet them. And that's how we turn what looks like a liability into a strength.
So as we get ready to start closing out here, we want to remind you, it's easy to stereotype the generations, but when you take a step back, you realize that all generations really want the same thing at work. Everyone wants to feel respected. Everyone wants to feel a sense of purpose, and everyone wants to feel stability, no matter the generation.
So the language and the tools, they do differ, but the core needs are timeless. Leaders who get that don't waste time fighting stereotypes. They build teams that leverage differences for stronger outcomes.
So our challenge to you as leaders is to stop asking, what is wrong with this generation? Start asking, what shaped this generation? And how can I lead them effectively?
And if you do that, you're going to build workplaces where every generation feels valued and contributes their very best.
So thank you for joining us on the Ascended Workplace, and we'll see you next time.